G'day. I'm very proud to introduce the next speaker, Peter Gfader. I was privileged to work with Peter on several .NET projects, and this guy really knows how to ship software. This is the presentation that should be seen by every .NET developer. So with that, I welcome Peter Gfader.
All right, continuous deployment, continuous delivery, that's my talk. Hello everyone.
Can you tell everyone that you're leaving?
Oh yeah, that's my last talk in Australia because I'm flying out next week. I'm going to Europe for a couple of weeks, months, years, not sure yet.
You told me weeks.
My girlfriend is there and we spend a bit of time in Zurich, a couple of months or years, not sure yet. And I might actually come back because my girlfriend loves Australia and me as well, and we had a very good time here, so we'll see.
She just loved Australian men.
Yeah, no comment. Yeah, so my last talk here. Success. Since we are here and we talk about deployment, that's actually a very good sign, because if you deploy something to production, that means you have done something successfully, and done something successfully is the development of your software. I've worked on a couple of projects in the past where I was not successful, so I never had to actually think about the deployment. So if we are here and talk about deployment, that's a very good thing. Just one thing. Last week there was Juval here, the guy from the US. He's very good in WCF. He's a Microsoft Regional Director. He's a Microsoft legend. He's just awesome, knows all about the little bits and pieces that happen inside WCF. And we did a 5-day training session with him. And during his talk, during these 5 days, he mentioned a couple of times what a successful project is for him. And there were 3 things. Do you remember those, Diganta? That's a test. 3 things. He always said on time, on scope, and on budget. Basically money, time, and features. I would actually go a step further. I would actually say if your software is not in production, it is not successful. So if no user is actually using your software, what happened to quality? Quality is hard to measure, I would say. What is quality for you or for your clients?
You said about some sort of reason.
Yeah. He mentioned their maintainability. He mentioned their availability and things like that, performance, things like that. So that falls into quality, I would say. Yeah. And that's maybe a feature, kind of. Yeah. So what we are going to talk about today is about deployment. So how do we get our software in production? I have a couple of tweets here from DevOps Borat. He's fantastic. And the production server is not in production if you'd never got waken up by 2 a.m. That happened actually to one of my workmates, to Peter Dimiridis. He works on another client, and he got an SMS text message in the middle of the night because the production server went down. So it's good to set up those, but if your production server never woke you up, then you have a problem. I just want to clarify 2 things, and that's continuous deployment versus continuous delivery, because these are 2 distinct things. So continuous deployment means we deploy continuously to after each change, which is a checking that we developers do, to a certain environment. Hey, Justin. And normally that's a development or test environment. So we immediately after each checking, we deploy to that environment. Continuous delivery, on the other hand, means we are production ready. So at any point in time, we have a green, stable release that we could deploy to production. So that's the major differences. So the biggest difference there is there's a manual step there involved in continuous delivery. As you can hear from my funny accent, I'm not from Australia. I'm not a typical Italian, as you can see. And I'm not from Germany. The important bit to mention about me is my blog. So remember my last name and blog in front of it, and there you can find all the information about tonight. I publish my slides afterwards there and other things as well. So that's what we are going to look at. We look quickly at the deployment panes, a couple of goals. Then I have 2 demos that are where I want to show you on how to deploy continuously and how to set up continuous delivery, and at the end a couple of best practices. So before we get started with my things, I want to know a couple of things from you guys. And the first bit that I would like to know is how you deploy software to production. I start with an option, and that's deployment from Visual Studio, which is not very nice, but we can obviously do it, and most of the people probably do that. Who is deploying from Visual Studio with a right-click publish? One, two, couple. Okay. What other options do we have? How are you guys deploying to production?
Copy it over.
Xcopy.
Yeah, copy over.
I think he's talking about manually, copy, paste.
Yeah.
Manually.
Ah, copy paste.
Yeah, we take a backup first, of course.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's good.
That's done manually too.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah, that's an option, I would say. FTP, yep. And how do you start the FTP process? Do you do a right click in Visual Studio and you say deploy? So it's a manual FTP process.
Yeah, well, but it has clever. If the connection drops, it keeps going. So
yep.
it's one of those that queues and it's crashing.
But if you chose the wrong folder inside the app, you'd be hosed. Yeah.
It warns you though. That's the only thing. It's not very clever.
Depends how tired you are, whether you ignore the warning.
Is there more that you can think of?
exe
An installer that you... Who is shipping software via a CD-ROM that you are sending via the post to your clients? No one? Okay, that's good. Because obviously if you're shipping CDs around, then you can't deploy or release software every day. That doesn't work. All right, I'm quite happy with this list. I jump back here, and obviously the deployment process that we're going to use is pretty much dependent from the application that we are developing. So if you're developing a web application, you can use Xcopy deployment or Visual Studio or whatever. If you're using SharePoint or CRM, there are other ways to deploy those applications. And what we've seen is we have a manual deployment process published from Visual Studio, Xcopy, a deployment document, and a deployment PowerShell script that you can use.
Where's the bat file?
That should be the bat file, including the bat file. That's just PowerShell. All right, what I see most of the times is that we have a deployment document. And basically this deployment document, I show you a sample here from our internal procedure. That's a release procedure for Code Editor. That's an internal tool. So if we release a new version of Code Editor, we have to follow this document. And it's quite a bit of pain, because you have to increase this version number in this file. You have to clean up a report table. You don't have to do this anymore. You do the same work as in this database. You automate this step. Okay, that's something we can automate. There is a change in this app config file. Then we go over here, we change these bits and pieces. Then there's another to do here. Then we have to choose the right version of Vice. We do a get latest of our code, obviously. We open SSWL folder. We move this to team build. So that's something that we can probably automate in the future, which is good. And it goes on and on. As you can see, this page, this document has 12 pages. So to release a new version of Code Editor takes around 2 hours, 4 hours. So that's something we don't want to do. And obviously, if you want to run through this document, and actually that's funny. Additionally, you have more time and you want to do a good job, then you can actually do more stuff here. I think it's customizing the installer images. So you see that's very painful. That's something we don't want to do. So let's have a look on a couple of pain points with deployment. If the first problem is if there is only one guy that can do the deployment, if the guy is not in the company, you can't deploy a new version of your software. That's pretty obvious. The next problem that we have is no one reads the fucking manual. So
Edit that out.
edit it out, sorry. Are we not allowed to say that in Australia? All right. I was thinking that's only in the US.
Cheap fly.
All right. So
Go back. What was it?
So no one likes to read a manual. And following a manual document, that's just boring and so error prone. So you've seen these 14 steps, 14 pages of documents that we have to follow, and that's very hard to actually do. The other problem with manual deployments, it takes hours instead of seconds, because we just want to double-click something and it gets deployed instead of following this long document. The other advantage that we want to take care of is we want to fail fast. So we want to immediately get feedback, hey, is the production server ready? Was the production deployment okay or not? And the biggest problem that I faced in the last days as well is the deployment on a deployment day causes a lot of stress. Because you work so hard until you get to the deployment day and you're already over the top because you spent so many hours fixing bugs, implementing features and things like that. You get to work on a Saturday because you can't do it during the week, and on Saturday you get even more stress because you realize, hey, the production server hardware is missing a certain feature, all different kind of weird things. But if you would deploy already much earlier, you would actually realize broken things on the production hardware. So a lot of problems there. And deployment is actually very hard. And it gets a little bit easier with the Microsoft tools, but hopefully with the next version of Microsoft TFS it gets even easier. I hope, I have strong hopes in that. So deployment is very hard because we have to take care of configuration files, we have to take care of the existing data, existing database, we have to take care of updates, so we want to only update certain bits and not replace the whole website or the whole Silverlight application. We need to start and stop external dependencies, services, and all things like that. So deployment is very hard. Manual is not fun. That's very obvious. Now, changing the job is not an option, I would say. So we don't do that. So what is the goal of continuous deployment or continuous delivery? We want to obviously deliver business value faster, because if you spend an hour for a bug fix and the customer sees the bug fix not until a couple of months, that's obviously a problem. So we want to automate this deployment process there. There is a better way to fail fast. I actually experienced this yesterday. I had a hard drive failure with my SSD drive, and I initially thought, oh man, all my data is gone. But it was only the boot sector, and a workmate of mine, Eric, he helped me out to fix that. So we ran a couple of tools to recover my SSD drive. So what we want to do with the continuous delivery is we want to fail fast. And using SSD drives in your production hardware is not a solution for that. We want to fail fast because then we get the immediate feedback on what is wrong in our production hardware and so on. And that's the thing that I talked to you already about. The go live day, we don't want to realize that something on the production hardware is missing. And that happens actually very often, that you deploy to production hardware the first time and then you realize, hey, our production environment is not ready yet because SQL Server is not the right version there, you don't have enough memory there, or all different kinds of weird issues. If you deploy very early to production, then you can actually test it beforehand, and you don't get all the stress on the deployment day. Releasing small increments is obviously a good best practice as well, because if you release small increments, you can test these small increments, and you have less number of defects in your production environment. So an ideal pipeline of deployment would look like that. So we have a delivery team, we call these the developers over here. We have version control set up, so all these developers checking code to version control. On each check-in there's a trigger, and on this trigger we run our build and we run all the unit and integration tests. If that fails, we get obviously something back from the build server. Normally that's an email or a red alert button somewhere, or some nice music plays somewhere. Yep, Julian?
What kind of branching strategy do you have?
We
Checking directly to
the question was what kind of branching strategy we are using, and we are not using any branching strategy at all, because I think keep it as simple as possible, and we never had actually the need to go back in time and fix production code that we released a couple of weeks ago. So we had obviously to fix some bugs in production, but we always fix the bugs in the latest version. So we never had the need to go back in time. So this is the delivery pipeline, we call that. So there's a nice blog on continuousdelivery.com from Jess Humble. He's the continuous delivery god, and basically on this blog you can find this image there. I'll just run you through that quickly. So once the build and unit tests are green, then the next step triggers, and these are the automated acceptance tests. Normally these are tests that run something on the UI, so like a coded UI tests or Telerik tests or Watin tests or Selenium tests or something like that. Basically these try to simulate a user clicking through the application. And it could be just one test that does a quick run through the shopping cart, add something to the shopping cart, checkout process. If the price is okay with the number of items or things like that, then we give it a green tick. So it could be very simple, it could be very complex, obviously. So if this gate gives a green tick here, then we go to the next test, and that will be the user acceptance test. So there is always a manual step in here. So normally what we're doing is we talk to the product owner, and the product owner says, hey guys, how do you feel like about this latest release? And we have a quick discussion about what we did, and if everything goes okay. If the product owner says all is good, we're going to the release and we click a button and deploy. So this is the continuous delivery pipeline. This is an ideal scenario and how it could look like. Important bit to mention here is the tests. So in order to set up a continuous delivery, you need to have a lot of tests, because the tests give you the confidence that everything is okay in your code. All right, let's have a look on the how-to part. This is the hard part. But let's have a quick look on that one. So I have two demos for you, and the first one is the start from scratch. I jump into Visual Studio, and I have here a Northwind application. In the background, you can see here, this is a virtual machine running in VM Player. Oh, I didn't want to go into full screen, actually. So this is my TFS. It was actually very simple to set this up. I just installed Windows 7 on this one, and I installed TFS Basic. So next, finish, very easy. Nothing special or nothing fancy on this part. You can see my CPU load goes a bit crazy. It's loading the project file. Let's see how that goes. In the meantime, I can show you the actual website. So what I have there is a little website hosted under Twitterfish at the moment. So this is my little pet project where I'm working on at the moment. Northwind MVC, good day Twitter lovers, and I see here the current version. Sorry for that, go away. So the current version of this little website is 0.0.5 and the little build number. The only big difference that I want to mention here is that I have a latest a folder called latest, and this is where I have set up continuous deployment. So in this folder I'm continuously deploying the latest version on each check-in, and I show you how to do that in a second. So once my Visual Studio has prepared the solution, that's actually the splash screen I think that they implemented. So what we see here is my web.northwind. So that's hosted under Twitterfish. By the way, I have to say thank you to discountasp.net, because they gave me this account for free just to play around with and to show off on the user groups. And the good thing about discountasp.net is they support the web deployment. So all the things that I show you today, you can do with discountasp.net. And I think that's the first provider that is actually supporting that at the moment. So that's the website, that's the latest version. Obviously, if you have different servers, this should be underneath latest.northwind.com or other places. So I look here at my solution that I have. I have a couple of integration tests, I have a couple of unit tests for this bit, and a little MVC application. And what I do now is I just make a little change here to the color of my background. So that should be green, and ReSharper actually has a new feature, ReSharper 6, that shows you underneath the colors, shows you the color of the color code. That's quite nice. So you can see the color that it will be at the end. What I need to do manually at this stage, I need to manually increase the version number here. And once I start editing, Visual Studio is contacting my TFS. It is trying to check out this file, and it was finally able to do that. Okay. So what I do now is I do a check-in, and I say nicer colors. So what happens now is I'm checking in my change to source control. Source control is TFS. on TFS there is team build setup as well. So that to set up team build is very easy as well. You go into your team build settings, next, finish, and then you have set up team build. It's very easy. What happens now in the background is that my build server is building the latest release, is running all the tests, and if everything goes green, it is deploying something to the /latest. And we have a quick look on how that looks under the hood. So I look into my old build definitions, and I should see here a new build triggered underneath queued. Yeah. Yep.
Your tests are in unit or MS?
MS test. Yeah, very simple tests actually. They are not really doing anything at this stage. So I'm looking here at the latest build. So the build is running on my build server on this box here. And if I double click this guy, I can actually look into the details what the build server is doing. Who has actually seen this already or something similar? So this is basic. Okay, you have almost seen this. That's cool. So that's basically the portal to TFS build, where you can actually see what's happening on the build server. And what we see here is the build server is crunching numbers. It's running msbuild for this project and so on. You can actually see the password here, so I shouldn't show that too long. And things like that. So I just quickly jump back to the slides in the meantime. So the build server is now crunching, running unit tests and deploying. So in the meantime, I continue here with my slides. So in order to set up this, you need obviously continuous integration setup. And the tool for continuous integration would be TFS in our case, because we use the whole Microsoft stack. There are other tools like TeamCity or Cruise Control. Who has used TeamCity? Justin? No one else? Cruise Control? 2, 3. Cruise Control is free, I think. Yes. Is it? Yeah. I really liked Cruise Control. I found it quite easy and nice to set up. So we need a continuous integration tool, obviously, and we need a build automation as well. So, and for build automation, we use again the Microsoft tool, and the Microsoft tool for that is msbuild. So we need these two components on our build server. And if you install TFS, everything is there out of the box. You don't have to install anything manually. That's something I love about TFS. You install TFS, and you get everything out of the box. The management of TFS is quite easy as well. I can show you quickly on how that looks like. There is a tool called TM Foundation Server Administration Console, something like that. Microsoft has some awesome product names. And with TFS 2010, I found the management of TFS very, very easy. So I'm looking now at my build server. And what I should see here is one default collection. So the default collection is the placeholder for all my projects and team projects. And if you install the TFS basic, you will get the default project, so that means source control, and you will get the build configuration. And in here you can see build controllers and build agents. But all I did here really is next, finish, and next, finish twice. So installing TFS and installing the build server. So fairly easy, no customization at this point. So once we have that going, we need automated tests, obviously. And these automated tests are important because they give us the confidence that everything is green when we do a new check-in. And to do those, we can use unit tests, integration tests, smoke tests, acceptance tests, whatever you want to call them. But the more tests you have, the better. And the next bit that we need to do is we need to set up packaging of software. And I show you how that works. If I go back to my the build succeeded. So now I get a green tick here. That means my build was successful. I'm just jumping here between the slides and the current build process. So if I do an F5 here, I should see a newer version. Yay! Yay! All right, so that was continuous deployment. So continuously we're deploying to this certain folder. And now I show you quickly on how that is set up. So I go back to my Visual Studio. And the first bit that we need to do is we need to, in our web project, so I'm talking here about web applications. If I go here to the properties, or I do a double click on the properties folder, I come to the properties dialog as well, hopefully sooner or later. I think I did a double click. No, I did. So there is a nice tab called package and /publish web. And in there, you should tick this box, because this box creates a zip file for you. And that zip file holds your code, your application. The good thing about this, you can actually give this zip file to an IT administrator, and the IT administrator could actually import the application for you as well. So if an IP administrator is not trusting you, you can always say, hey, I send you this zip file over via email. You can open up the zip file, have a look what's in there, and if you're happy with that, you can install it. To install that, the IT administrator would go into IIS Manager on the production server or somewhere. Then he would click on the default website when it is coming up. And there is a new menu point there. So I'm looking now at IIS Manager. I have here sites, and I have a default website. So this is my local development platform, IIS. So there is a new menu point here, deploy import application. In order to get this part here, you need to install web deployment package on this IIS. But that is fairly easy as well. The only thing you need to do is you need to click on this guy here and click one box. Then you have it on your IIS.
You need IIS 7, I believe?
I think so, yeah. You need probably IIS 7. So here you can give it the zip file, and then the IT administrator would click through the zip file and would install it in this IIS. But this is a manual step, and what we already agreed on, we don't want to do manual steps. So the first bit is this. So we have the ability to create this zip file for us. So one way to create this zip file would be, I do a right click over here, I would say build the deployment package. So I could create this zip file within Visual Studio, but that's not what we want. We want to create this zip file on our TFS, on our build server. So in order to get that going, I go to my build definition. That's part of my Team Explorer here. There is my build definition on check-in. I edit that thing. And there is underneath process, there is a couple of settings that I can say, and that's the important bits here. msbuild arguments create package on publish equals true. So what that does is when the TFS build server is crunching a new build, at the end of the build succeeded, it will create this zip file for us. So I have the zip file on the build server, and then from the build server I can deploy that zip file to different environments. For web and Silverlight application, yeah. For Windows Forms applications, I would say you still need to use the installer. But I'm pretty sure you can use a command here to say, create an installer for me automatically on build. That should work somehow, yeah. Yep.
What is schema changes for your database?
Good question. The question is, where do the database schema changes happen? I have the opinion that the database schema changes should be a manual change, because I think the database is our holy grail. So I don't want to let any tool automatically update our database schemas. So what we are doing is we use a tool called SQL Deploy. SQL Deploy is a tool where you can actually say, I want to update this database with these SQL scripts. I click through the application. At the end, I see a nice report, what is going to happen, and I have to actually manually do that. So I actually have the opinion that you shouldn't automate that. But there are a couple of tools to do that.
So at the stage, like obviously when you go publish to the remote server web deploy, you can't do that until after the scheme's been updated.
Yes. Yeah. So what we do is before we deploy the database updates. So we run the database scripts. If that is okay, we double click the zip file and then it gets deployed. We not really, because we said, that's a bit too dangerous, because all the schema changes, we didn't trust the tool at that stage. But there were, Justin is talking about, if I go back to the properties, what you could do is you could set up a database project as part of. In this database project, you make all the changes to your SQL, and then you would include this SQL scripts as part of this tab here. So that means as part of the deployment process, msdeploy would update your database as well, automatically, which would be nice. But we didn't trust really the tool, so we said we stay with the manual step for that. So I was about here. So you can see here there are a couple of more properties. A couple of more parameters that I'm adding. And these parameters here, they are actually doing the deployment for me. So I'm specifying here deploy on build. So that's that bit. Then I have the deploy target. I'm saying deploy with msdeploy publish. Then I have the publish method, so WMSVC. That basically means use the msdeploy underneath the hood. And then I have here the discount ASP.NET URL. And this is basically where we are talking to the msdeploy on the server. Because the deployment happens from my build server to the production server. On the production server, there is a tool called msdeploy.axd that is listening for me. And on the client, I have a tool called msdeploy. And these guys talk together and arrange the deployment. And I show you in a second on how that looks like. Then there is obviously the username and password in there and everything. But basically, that's it. So that's how you set up continuous deployment to a certain server. Who thinks this is very easy? Who thinks it's a bit tricky because there are so little bits and pieces to know? I think it's too hard still, because especially all these URL parameters here. I think that's not nice to know.
Also, if the website's not already created on your destination server, you have
that would work. Yep. So that would definitely work. So in the properties of my website here, I'm specifying that it should expect underneath this URL an IIS website, .NET web application. If that is not there, msdeploy would create that for me. So that's one good thing that would work without me creating that.
Does it set up all the application codes and all the .NET?
I think it would just use the default application pool. So it wouldn't create a separate application pool, nothing special there. So if you want to tweak that, you have to do it manually here. Yeah. All right, back to the slides. So obviously, I've told you about this zip file. You have to specify, create this deployment zip file. Then you have to specify a couple of arguments here. Then automatically, we are creating that thing. As a separate result, on the build server, we get these couple of files. And with these files, we can actually set up continuous delivery. Because all the tests are run, I could actually say now, OK, I'm happy with this version of my code. And with this command file here, I could say, please deploy that to my build server. Sorry, to my production server. And what this command file is doing, it is running msdeploy and it's talking to my production server. So this is... what we see here is the output folder on the build server. Zip file contains all the code. Source manifest is a manifest file for msdeploy itself. Set parameters is the configuration file. And that's an important one because that's the configuration file for a specific environment. So if you have a stress test environment or a UAT environment or a staging environment or production environment, you can change these values in here. And depending where you're deploying to, you would use a different file here. There is a readme.txt that shows you all the details about how this deployment works. So you get all this for free. I showed you already one way to install the package. So you could click on the default website, click on import application, which is not what we want. So configuration, let's have a look on that one. Now I have to tell you another complicated thing. And there is on how we actually configure our application. And there are two important steps here. The first one is XML transformations, and the second one is XML parameterization. And who knows about XML transformations? Okay, couple, that's good. So XML transformations means I can have on my web config separate configuration files. So if I say I'm deploying a debug version or a release version, change certain web.config settings to a certain parameter. So at the moment, I'm looking at debug version of my code. So I would use the debug version of this file here. I show you quickly on how my release version looks like. So if I look in my web config, that's basically a normal web config with a couple of bits and pieces. If I look into the release.config, there is obviously more. And in my release config, what I normally do is I'm setting my production database, I'm setting my production error emails and things like that. But the important bit to mention here is this is not environment specific. So every time you deploy a release version, we are deploying these settings here. So this is not environment specific. So web transforms are applied on every deployment. They are part of Visual Studio 2010, but there is no UI for that. So in order to work with those, you have to go in here, create a new file called web.production.config, web.uat.config, and so on. There is no UI where you can do this, but hopefully we get that with the next version. And this XML transformation happens on build, during msbuild. So that's the first complicated bit. The second complicated bit is, I said already this is not environment specific. The second complicated bit in my eyes is the web parameterization. And that is applied on every deployment, and it's run through msdeploy. And the tricky bit here is it is based on XPath expressions and things like that. So let's have a quick look on that. So if we want to parameterize our application, we need to first declare the parameters so that we can reference them later. And in the second step, we want to set them somewhere. And let's have a quick look on how that looks like. So I have in my web.config, I have a parameter called zap download URL. And who was here 2 months ago, I talked a little bit about this zap download URL. This is something environment specific. If I work on my local machine, I want this to be /. If I deploy this to a production environment, I want this to be cdn.northwind.com.au. So dependent on where the software is sitting, this should be different. So the first step of this parameterization is I have to specify the parameter. And specifying parameters happens in this parameters.xml file. Who is still with me? 1, 2, 3, couple of people. Okay, I haven't lost all of you. That's good. All right, so first I declare the parameters, so for later usage. So I say, there is a parameter called zap download URL config. And this is the description, and the default value is this bit here. Where can you find this setting? This is in my web config, and if you search for this parameter, search for configuration. Underneath configuration, there is an XML element called application settings. There's an XML settings. There is a parameter called attribute name, and there is a value, and grab me out of there the text. This is XPath, very ugly. But there is a lot of help for this. So the first bit of help is underneath this block. You don't have to type down these URLs. I put them all on my block, so you don't need to remember those. So you have a couple of options there to figure out these parameters and how those work. Basically, what I say is I declare a new parameter and where you can find the parameter. So once I declare the parameter, I can actually set the parameter somewhere in my parameter file. And that's what I show you next. So I declare my parameter in the parameters.xml, which is hard to find. And I'm setting the parameter then in my set parameters file. So what I'm saying here is set my parameter. This is the name of the parameter, and this is the value. It should be CDN, so Content Delivery Network, ssw.com.au/something/something. So I can say, if you deploy to production, use this file, and then would automatically make sure that this configuration setting gets applied. Happy with that so far?
So
okay.
How do you differentiate between production and test or whatever there?
That's on this slide here. So on this slide we can see different set parameters files. So what we do here is we have a couple of different files, and in each file we declare the different options. And if I deploy to the, for example, the stress test environment, I would use this file. And this file holds all the configuration settings for the stress test environment. And this is how you configure the different environments. So this is environment specific. So if I want to run this, I would double click on these command files here. The command file would give me the option, hey, which configuration do you want to deploy to? I would choose one of these guys here, and then it would contact msdeploy on the server, would do all the merges there, and would deploy to production. or wherever I wanted to deploy. It's fairly complicated what happens here, but if you do this the first time, you can easily get a handle on this. If you double-click this guy, it will show you a nice readme.txt. You have to read a little bit, but then you can figure out how it works.
Where do you store the set parameters.xml files?
These are just on the build server. So I show you quickly on how the... Yeah. So if I go in here, I'm back on my build server. So on my build server, what I did is, I should have shown you that before, I have a deployment folder. In there is a Northwind deployment folder. And here I have a folder called configuration. And that's basically all my different parameters for the different environments. So that's, again, something you have to manually do. But it's definitely worth doing, because once you have set up this, all you need to deploy is basically double-click on a batch file, which is very nice.
I would have thought you'd have kept that a team system something.
Would be nice, yeah. I think that's coming up with the next version of TFS, hopefully. Because that's actually a problem that I don't like about my solution, because these files are not under source control.
Yeah.
So if I
That's really important.
yeah, that's very important, yeah. Yeah. Because if I delete those, they're gone. So I don't have any, I probably have a backup somewhere on Dropbox or wherever, but it's not nice. Back to here. So just to explain that again, I have here a configuration folder that has all the different set parameters file, and I have separate batch files. I'll show you that as well. And in this batch file here, oops, I basically say this is the configuration that I want to deploy. This is my debug output. That is not really that important. This is my parameter, and from this parameter I choose the right file. And there is another batch file that is actually running the deployment. And all that does is calling my deploy.cmd to my Twitter fish account, asp.net, and so on. With the password is there as well, nice. And that's the set parameter file. So you need obviously to set this up manually. But I think I can actually publish these batch files somewhere so you can reuse those. So at least you have a starting point instead of completely starting from scratch yourself. All right, back to here. Just a little bit more on the details what happened behind the scenes. So if you do a deployment from the build server, under the hood you run msdeploy. So msdeploy is talking to this guy, Web Deployment Agent Service, on the web server. So this is the client and this is the server. And they talk to each other and say, hey, I have these new files for you. What version of the code do you have over there? And then they are basically merging the latest changes, which is pretty cool. Now, who is following Paul Stovell's blog? One? Only one. OK. Now, Paul Stovell is working on a piece of software that does something similar. Let's have a look if I find it. Yeah, that's it. So Paul Stovell is working on a software called Octopus, and it's an automated deployment solution for .NET applications developed by NuGet and designed for Erlang. The good thing about his solution is he's calling the Web Deployment Agent Service Tentacle, which I find that's really a very good point. So Microsoft has always this very boring product name. So he's calling this server-side bit Tentacle, and the client side is called Octopus. So this is the same thing as we're doing with Microsoft tools. So we have on the client side msdeploy, and on the server there's Web Deployment Agent Service. And Paul Stovell has a tool called Tentacle, and on the client side there's a tool called Octopus. It's very similar. All right. So that was basically on how to set up continuous delivery and continuous deployment. Who is happy with that? Yep, good. Now, I know that you guys probably have already an existing environment. So you're doing already somehow release software to production. And what I normally have seen is a deployment document. And the deployment document is basically a couple of pages where you're describing on how the deployment works. And if you have an existing environment, I would definitely try to start up to document all the single steps that you're doing. Because that means if Bob is on holidays, you can give this document to someone else, and that would actually deploy. Someone else could actually deploy the software. So the first step, if you have an existing environment, is you make sure that you have a document that describes the deployment process. Then the next step is you need to measure your deployment process. And I would definitely start with the most expensive step in your deployment process. And the most expensive step is normally copying files and comparing files. So you measure which is the longest bit that takes the longest, and then you try to automate that. The important bit here is you should really fall in love with your IT guys. So you need to work together with your IT guys, because your IT guys normally are responsible for all the IT equipment and databases and things like that. So you need to really sit with them and ask them, hey, how can we automate the certain bits and pieces? I show you another quick demo where how we do the deployment at my current client that is called Auctions Plus, and we have here the deployment on a napkin. So it works similar as the continuous delivery pipeline that we've seen with the green and red. It is a little bit more advanced, let's say. So we have a couple of developers that check into source control, and on each check into source control we have set up a build server, and the build server is crunching a new build on each check-in. The build server is crunching a new build and is running a couple of tests for us as well, which is pretty cool. So we get back a tick or a cross from the build server, just if the build is fine and the unit tests are fine. The next step that we're doing is on each check-in we have continuous delivery set up. So we deploy to a dev test environment here. So this is the pipeline that we see if we do, that's basically continuous delivery, this red one here. So that means on each check-in we are continuously deploying to a dev test environment. So this is continuous deployment, as we said. Additionally, what we have set up is every night we deploy to a stress test environment. And the reason why we're doing this is because we are very keen on performance in this project. Because this project is, we are building an auctioning software, or actually we've built an auctioning software, and if the auctioning software is not working okay, the company is losing a lot of money. So if the auctioning can't happen the next day, that would be a big problem. So what we're doing to circumvent that, we're running stress test overnight. In the morning we come in and we know, okay, the latest version of the code is all good, or it has a certain performance problem or whatever. So we can decide then if we deploy it to production or not. So during the night we have a stress test set up, and the stress test, we are basically hammering the stress test server here. So what we do is we have 2,000 clients that hit the server very hard, and we update the auction every 10 times a second, I think, or something like that. So basically what we're doing overnight is from 3 to 5 we're hammering the stress test server, just to see how good the stress test server can handle the 2,000 clients.
What are you doing there? Setting up 2,000 virtual machines or something?
No, we have 10 clients, and on each, 10 physical clients, and on each physical client we run at around 200-300 the software client.
Right, okay.
Obviously it would be better if we would have more. So it would be better scenario if we could set up 100 physical clients, and on each physical client start only 10 software clients, because that would mean 10 times 100, yeah, we would reach 1,000 clients there.
Are you just looking for error logs then?
Oh, no, we actually...
Come in the next day and you go, what happened last night?
Yeah, we look at, obviously we look at the error emails. We get, we have Elma set up, so we get error emails, and we look at the other one is the stress test report. I just go quickly to the slides here. So we have a report server set up, and the report server sends us an email at 6 in the morning, and we get a nice email in our inbox, and I show you quickly on how that email looks like. So 6 a.m. in the morning, I get this email coming in, and that's the stress test report that we're getting. So this is a pretty old one because I was not in the company, so I didn't receive the latest ones. So I see here that we've run the stress test from 3 a.m. till 5 a.m. This is the version of the software that we tested. This is the maximum client number, which is actually very low, so obviously we had a problem here, 650. That's the CPU usage, 40%, which is okay. This is all virtualized, so this is only one box. In this virtualized box we run web server and SQL server all in one, so it's not a very beefy box, and that's the reason why the CPU goes up to 40%. Then we look at all these numbers basically, and we're comparing these numbers every day, and we see, okay, this looks alright or this doesn't look alright. This is how we know if the latest version of the code is okay or not.
Reporting and information, is it just logging to a database as it is stress testing?
Yep. So what we're doing here is on the stress test server, we start perfmon at 250 or something. And perfmon is logging to the database a couple of counters. And I show you those counters in a second here. So this is the report that we're getting, a couple of nice figures. And all these counters here, they come from perfmon. So perfmon is a tool from that is installed in Windows that you can, every server has that installed, even your local box here. So if you fire up perfmon.exe, you can actually add all these stats on your computer itself and look at those. So what we do there is on the server, we measure memory usage, we measure the network interface, we measure the paging file, we measure the physical disk, we measure the CPU load, so 40% is quite alright, and we measure a couple of SQL stats as well that we care about. Then obviously we measure the top 10 of the CPU usages, and that's obviously always worker process because that's the IIS process that is handling all the requests. SQL Server is the big memory eater here, and a couple of stats more. But all these numbers come from perfmon. So this report basically grabs a couple of numbers from perfmon, from our local database, crunches that numbers, and gives us this nice report. And a nice update that we have done in the last days that I want to show you as well is, let me see if I find it. I should get that email somewhere here. No, auction feedback, stress test report. So I'm looking now at the newer version of the stress test report, and hopefully we see a nicer image because we actually improved that report a little bit. Maybe I use step 1, stress test report. Yep, that's a little bit better. Okay, that's better. So we improved that report in the last days. Me and Adam worked on that one. So what we see here is this is the last night. So at the last night we saw incoming users until 3:30 or 3:50. Then we had stable users of 652 for 1 hour, and then at 4:30 we're dropping the clients. And the nice thing about this report, we can actually compare this report with the past. So instead of remembering the last numbers from last day or from the last days, we can immediately see, hey, the numbers increased or the numbers increased. So we can have a nice trend here. Now, obviously, you can get very fancy with this report. It would be nice if these two graphs would be overlapping, so you could see immediately what's going on, but we couldn't figure out that yet. Adam, have you been able to figure that out yet? Next week. Okay.
I was at the attempt to put minimum and maximums for the last week on there too, so you can see where the range has been. Right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
What interesting things has this found for you? I mean, I imagine there's some horror stories that you've avoided because of this.
The biggest problem for us was Windows Update. So when there is Windows Update running, that reboots all our servers, and then we see a big spike in here. We're losing all the connections. That was our biggest problem.
I think Greg means, did you have cases of early feedback of this telling you
not to do a deployment?
Yeah, what you did
yes.
yesterday was very bad.
Yeah, I think one time we had this problem because we have a WCF service on our backend, and we implemented some security there, and the security was a bit buggy on there, so we realized the next morning that the performance degraded a lot. So we said, okay, that's no good, so we have to fix that problem and wait another day until we can deploy. But this report was very helpful. Yeah.
The clients that are stress testing, are they just like unit tests? Is that what you're just running? Unit tests? Or are you running like watching or something like that?
So how do we, what do we use on the client side to stress test? And what we're doing is we run a console application. So we have written a manual console application that connects to the server, and that is basically placing bits in the auction. Bit.
Web services and something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's a fake client.
It's a fake client, yeah. So we have these guys, plus we have real clients as well. And the real client is basically just if you go to a certain URL, /auction web. So what we did there is we have an automated task in each box, and that's in the task we say at 3 a.m. in the morning, start up Internet Explorer and go to this URL and just sit there for 2 hours and then close the connection. Very nothing really sophisticated.
So as a client, when you're connecting with the console app, you're not kind of testing, user sessions with ASP.NET, so you're maybe not getting any app recycles and making that, or would you be still getting that?
The question is, because we're using a console client, we are not really testing the web server that much. That's a fair point. The reason why we're using the console client is because it's not really a website that we want to test. We want to test only the WCF side of things. Yeah. Yeah. So what we're doing is we set up a console client. The console client connects to WCF, has a stable connection to WCF, and that is exactly the same thing as that would happen if I go in there. So I'm just showing you the application quickly. So what I'm doing here is I'm connected to my stress test server. That seems to be very slow today, or a little bit tired from the night. So I see here Silverlight coming up. And my Silverlight client here is establishing a connection to the server. And over this TCP socket connection, we are communicating back and forth to the server. And what we're doing with this console client is exactly the same. So the console client is exactly doing the same under the hood, just no UI for that. So I can place bits here. So what we're doing is we run 1,000 console clients, plus we run a couple of Silverlight clients. The problem with the Silverlight clients is they are quite heavy on the client. So if you run thousands of these guys, you're not able to handle those, because even... Yeah.
Say, oh, I can get 600 concurrent users on my website, but in real world you put it out there and you get 200 and something. Website dying.
Yeah, we could actually handle 2,000 users at the same time. The only problem is we don't have so many clients available. And if you look at here now, VMware is running, but this client, the Silverlight client, is quite heavy. But under the hood, the connection that is established to the server is exactly the same as we are doing in the console client. So if you go to this URL, stresstest.auctions+, at 3 a.m. in the morning, you can see a lot of blinking things coming up, and it's quite a busy auction there. Yeah.
I'll be sure to do that.
Yeah. So back to here. So that's our deployment pipeline. So once we get this report in the morning, and once we are quite happy with the report, because the report tells us, yeah, it looks all right, or doesn't look good, we can actually then say, okay, we deploy to the staging environment. So what we have then there is a deployment batch file, and with this deployment batch file we can deploy into the staging environment. And this deployment batch file is exactly the same deployment batch file that I've shown you before. So we're using the same technology. There is a zip file, there's a manifest file, there's a command file. We're double-clicking on that one, and then it goes off to staging environment. And staging environment is the environment where our real users can go to and look at. So basically the demo site. This is our staging environment. And to deploy to this server, we have to double-click a batch file. So what we do is we get emails when a build fails. That's the first thing. Then we get this, there is a nice tool called from the TFS Power Tools that you can install, and that basically tells you if the build is green. And this little tool tells you with the red cross if the build is failed. And if the build is failed, there's another guy that is starting counting in the background. And that basically gives us enough confidence if the build server is happy or not. So that's how we tackle this problem. So if the build is not green, I probably wouldn't do a get latest. So I wouldn't get latest of the broken source code. So that would solve that problem. I just want to show you that a deployment for this company called Auctions Plus works like that I have a couple of batch files. And in order to believe me, I show you my connection to the build server. So I log on to, that's my build server for Auctions Plus. I should see this little portal here. Then I can double click on one of these batch files and trigger a deployment to all the different environments. So here is the build server. Ooh, okay, it looks a bit different today. But basically, I could deploy to stress test. So what happens here is now it is automatically deployment to the stress test server, the latest version. Doesn't really make sense because to stress test we are deploying anyway every night. But so now you have seen a deployment, so on how the deployment works for us. So I do a double click here. And the good thing about running msdeploy, we are actually just updating files. So we are not deploying the whole website. We are not doing an X-copy and overwrite the whole application there. But msdeploy is talking to the web deployment agent, and they are exchanging only those files that are changed, which is awesome. I think that's really great.
Do you do a /t before you do the actual
/t is test what would be changed. No, we don't. Just run it, yeah. The question was if we do a /t before deployment, and that's a good question because with /t you could actually see what would happen on a deployment. So if I go in here, so this is my readme.txt file that I've shown you before, and if I do a /t, I'm running the msdeploy with this parameter called whatIf. I'm not sure if you guys can see that, but basically that would tell you what would happen if I would deploy this latest version to the web server. And then I could actually see, hey, these are all the files that have been changed, which is quite nice. So before you deploy, you can actually see what's going on. It's a good point. Maybe we should actually have that as an output somewhere. So you see this list of files, and then you look at and hit enter to confirm, and then we deploy. That would be actually quite a good suggestion. So when we do a deployment for Auctions Plus, we do a double click on the batch file, and if we go to the production environment, that what I'm showing here, we actually ask for a password. And the product owner or one of the developers is typing in the password, and then we can actually deploy it to the different environments. What we do as well is we have a ZSValidate page on each web server, and that ZSValidate page is just checking if the web server is happy with all the latest changes. So I quickly try to hit that. So that ZSValidate page makes sure that all the external dependencies from these IIS servers are up and running. Oh, actually, I shouldn't show you that one. Log off, please.
Why are you checking WCF, SQL?
What we're checking is that our SQL database is there. We're checking if the logging database is there. We're checking the connection string for our auto-logging database. We check the web service for the user authentication, where we authenticate users. Or maybe I make this a little bit bigger. We check the authentication provider, so that's another web server that is responsible for authentication. We check that the port is open for our auction web service, that's 4542. And we check that the upload folder is writable. So all the external dependencies that are not in our code, we make sure that they are okay. And if all these guys are green, we get this nice green apple up here. And that tells us all is good. All right, quickly run through the best practices, and in 5 minutes we are gone. So we have seen we need to do a lot of automation in order to get this up and running. Automation is important. So a good practice is deploy early. So when you start a new project, try to deploy to your production hardware as soon as possible. So maybe even after the first week, you can immediately deploy to production and just see if the whole deployment pipeline works okay. And I think that's maybe the most important takeaway from tonight. Now, if the website is down 99.999% of the time, the users will obviously be very happy if it is up sometimes, but that's not what we want. So we need a rollback plan. So when we deploy to a certain environment, we have a rollback plan, and a rollback plan that you can easily set up is a manual one. So instead of double-clicking a rollback plan, you could set up a little file that tells you, hey, to roll back, you need to copy this zip file, then do this, do this, do this. The reason why this is manual is this shouldn't happen so often. So even if this is hard, it doesn't really matter because it shouldn't happen so often. But it's very important to have a rollback plan. All right. Obviously, the database changes. The rolling back a database is not easy. Even if you automate that, it's never going to be easy. Now, another thing that we would like to have is a dashboard. We obviously want to know where is the latest build, which version is in which environment, is everything healthy. So what we do is we just have a little dashboard HTML page where we have in an iframe the single ZSValidate pages. It's not really that great, but it works okay. So in one go, we can see which version is on the different environments. It's not that fancy. Obviously, there are different options that we have. There is another screenshot that I copied from another video. That's an overview of different environments. So we have here demo server and fishpond environments, whatever that is. I think these are the different environments, middleware and app2. And with these green bars, we can actually see the status of the different environments. And somewhere, I think this bit tells me that the current version. So label 39, I think that's the version of the code, I think, not sure. But obviously you can have very simple ones where just displaying the version number, or very fancy ones. That's how far you want to go. The other best practice that we don't have either is an A/B test setup, so a guinea pig. So you deploy to a certain server, let this server running for a couple of hours. If the server doesn't throw you a lot of exceptions and error emails, then you deploy to your whole production environment. And Facebook is actually doing that. Facebook used to do that a couple of years ago. I think last year, they published a video on Kukion, and they told in this video that they are deploying to New Zealand before they deploy to the rest of the world. So Facebook used New Zealand as their guinea pig, which is interesting because that means New Zealand gets the latest changes for Facebook. And then once New Zealand runs okay for a couple of hours or days, then deploy the latest changes of Facebook to all over the world. So another good one is have a clone of your production environment. So if you deploy to a staging environment where you want to run tests or stress tests, you should have a setup. The hardware should be a clone of your production environment. All right, I quickly run through the last things. Have everything on the source control is obviously a best practice here. We want to know about failed logs or successful logs, so you should log that somewhere to a database. You can even do that in a little text file, what we are doing. And the best practice that I think is good is let only the product owner deploy to the environment. So let only one person deploy to the production environment. But that's open to discussion. The key takeaway is you should automate as much as you can, because deployment should really be automated, because manually doing things is very painful. And all should be good if you have all automated. So these are the Twitter accounts that you really should follow. There's this Borat, and that's me. I've run through these things. Now I have all these references on these slides. If you download the slides, you can look at all the blog posts. That's my blog post. There is Gotgu, there's Vijal, he's a Microsoft employee. He shows you on how to do this with msdeploy. A couple of more here, and thank you very much.
Before you go, I've got a task for you. Go to tv.ssw.com and subscribe to our newsletter. You'll be informed of all upcoming videos. In addition, if you're super keen, I'm all about inspecting and adapting. So send me an email or send me a tweet @Adam Kogan. Cheers.